In the middle of a dark and empty highway, headlights cut through the rain as a woman struggles inside her car, trapped by two vehicles boxing her in. The sound of tires screeching fills the air, her desperate attempts to escape only making the night more terrifying. From a distance, a massive truck approaches, its lights piercing the shadows. The driver slows down, realizing something is wrong, but he cannot yet see the danger she faces. At that moment, time seems to freeze. She grips the steering wheel, fear flooding her eyes, believing these could be her last moments. If you want to see more stories of real courage and survival, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. João had always been the kind of man people rarely noticed. A simple truck driver, he spent more nights on the road than at home, guiding his massive vehicle along endless highways that stretched across the countryside. His life was marked by routine, discipline, and a quiet sense of duty. To many, he was just another face at the fuel station, just another voice on the radio channel used by truckers. But to those who knew him well, João was a man who carried his responsibilities with pride, never complaining about the long hours or the solitude that often came with the job. Every journey began the same way. He would check the tires, adjust the mirrors, and carefully organize the small space in his cabin. A thermos of strong coffee always rested on the passenger seat, a reminder of his wife who prepared it before every trip. The sound of the radio played softly in the background, usually an old country song that reminded him of his father. João's world was the road, and though many people imagined it as lonely, for him it was where he felt most alive. He knew the turns, the rest stops, the hidden dangers, and the beauty of the open sky when the stars appeared without the interference of city lights. On that particular night, João was heading to a small town in the interior, carrying food supplies. The load was heavy, but the highway was quiet, and his focus was sharp as always. He thought about his children, already asleep when he left home, and about how he promised them he would be back in time for the weekend. It was this promise that kept him moving forward, 1 kilometer after another, refusing to allow fatigue to take control. There was nothing about him that suggested he would soon be thrust into a situation of life and death. He was no soldier, no policeman, no man trained for combat. He was simply a truck driver, a father, a husband, someone who wanted nothing more than to do his job and return safely to those waiting for him. Yet the road has a way of testing people when they least expect it, revealing strengths they never knew they carried. As the hours passed, João noticed the quiet rhythm of the night, the hum of the engine, the distant sound of crickets, the occasional car that sped by. To him, this was the normal symphony of travel. He had no idea that only a few kilometers ahead, a woman would be fighting for her life, and that his decision to keep driving forward would change everything. The protagonist of this story is not a man seeking glory or recognition. He's not driven by adventure or adrenaline. Instead, he is a man defined by ordinary choices, the kind of person the world often overlooks. And it is precisely in this simplicity that the power of his story lies. João's courage would come not from training or preparation, but from instinct, compassion, and the refusal to ignore another human being in danger. This was the man behind the wheel that night, tired, thoughtful, carrying the weight of responsibility, yet unaware that fate had chosen him to step into the role of protector when the moment arrived. The highway stretched endlessly before João, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the shadows of the night. He kept his steady grip on the wheel, the engine humming like a companion that never left his side. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the road slick and reflective, a mirror of the faint glow of his headlights. Everything seemed calm, almost too calm, when a sudden flicker in the distance broke the rhythm. At first, João thought it was nothing more than a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of another vehicle far ahead, but as he drove closer, the glow became clearer. A pair of hazard lights blinked desperately on the shoulder of the road. They pulsed like a heartbeat, on and off, fighting to be noticed. His instinct told him to be careful. Too many times he had heard stories of traps, fake accidents staged to lure drivers into ambushes. He eased his foot off the accelerator, torn between caution and concern. As the truck rolled closer, João could make out the outline of a small sedan, its rear lights faintly illuminated by the flashes. Something about the way the car sat on the shoulder seemed wrong. It was not parked neatly or broken down with a flat tire. It looked cornered, angled awkwardly, as if it had been forced to stop. João's stomach tightened. He leaned forward, scanning the scene. That was when he noticed another vehicle lurking just behind it. A dark SUV with its lights off, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. A voice inside him whispered to keep going, to stay out of trouble. He had a family waiting for him. He had a delivery to complete. But then he caught a glimpse that froze him. Through the fogged window of the sedan, he saw movement, frantic and desperate. A hand smacked against the glass, small and trembling. It was the hand of a woman, illuminated only for a second by his passing headlights. João's heart pounded. He knew that gesture. It was not the signal of someone waiting for a tow truck or a friend. It was a cry for help. Every instinct told him he was driving into something dangerous. But another part of him, the part that had been shaped by years of life on the road, could not ignore it. Truckers always looked out for one another, for travelers, for anyone stranded in the unforgiving silence of the highway. He slowed down further, the truck's massive tires hissing on the wet pavement. For a moment, he considered calling the police and continuing forward. But the distance to the nearest town was long, and by the time help arrived, it might be too late. He had to make a choice. Was he going to pass by and live with the image of that hand pressed against the glass? Or was he going to stop and face whatever waited in the shadows? As João's headlights swept across the sedan once more, the scene grew sharper. The SUV's door opened slightly, and he saw the silhouette of a man leaning out. The gesture was unmistakable, aggressive, demanding, threatening. The woman inside the car shifted frantically, trying to resist. João's pulse quickened, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned white. The encounter was no longer just unusual, it was undeniable. He was staring at a moment that could change everything. And in that instant, he knew he could not drive away. Fate had placed him here on this road, at this time. Ahead of him was danger, yes, but behind him was the option of safety, an option he could no longer take. He inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The drizzle tapped against his windshield like a drumbeat, steady and ominous. João's truck, a simple machine of steel and power, was about to become something else entirely. The road was no longer empty. It had turned into the stage of a fight between fear and courage, and João was right at the center of it. The seconds stretched into eternity as João's truck crawled closer to the scene. His heart beat heavily, almost louder than the hum of the engine. The hazard lights of the sedan flashed like desperate cries in the night, and the shadowed SUV behind it loomed like a predator ready to strike. João gritted his teeth. He knew what was happening. This was no accident, no simple roadside problem. A crime was unfolding right before his eyes. He slowed the truck even more, weighing his options. Every fiber of his being screamed that he was entering dangerous ground. The SUV door opened wider, and a man stepped halfway out, his posture aggressive, his arm jerking toward the woman in the sedan. The woman's muffled cry carried faintly through the stormy night, and João felt a cold wave rush over him. He had transported hundreds of loads across countless highways, faced mechanical failures, storms, even accidents, but never had he faced a situation like this. The rain, though soft, added to the sense of urgency, coating the road in a reflective sheen that seemed almost unreal. João's wipers dragged slowly across the windshield, every movement syncing with his rapid heartbeat. He thought about his wife, about his children asleep in their beds. He thought about the promise he had made to return home safely. And now, here he was, staring at men who clearly had no good intentions. But something inside João refused to turn away. He knew the stories. Families stranded on highways, travelers kidnapped or worse, lives ruined in minutes. He could not let this woman become another nameless victim, whispered about in truck stops. He could feel the responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavy yet undeniable. The SUV headlights suddenly flashed on, blinding him for a second. It was as if the criminals had realized they were no longer alone. João squinted against the light, but the sharp outline of the scene was burned into his vision. The man outside the SUV shouted something to the driver, a sharp command. The sedan shook slightly as the woman inside resisted again. João's fists tightened around the steering wheel. He had no weapon, no backup, no guarantee of survival if he chose to intervene. All he had was his truck, his courage, and the decision that needed to be made now. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The tension climbed higher, every second amplifying the danger. His mind raced through possibilities. He could floor the accelerator and block the SUV, maybe scare the men off with the sheer size of his machine. Or he could hold back, call the police, and risk arriving too late. Both options carried risk, but one demanded immediate action. The woman's hand slammed against the glass again, her silhouette illuminated by his headlights. That image struck him harder than anything else. This was no longer a choice, it was a call to act. João pressed his foot harder on the gas, not enough to rush blindly, but enough to close the distance with certainty. The roar of his truck filled the silence of the highway, a new presence that the criminals could no longer ignore. The SUV shifted, its tires rolling slightly forward as if testing him. The two vehicles now faced each other like predators circling prey. João's pulse thundered in his ears. He knew that whatever he decided in the next seconds would define not only this night, but perhaps the rest of his life. The tension had grown unbearable. There was no turning back. He was already part of this story. João's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles went pale. The truck's engine growled beneath him, a beast waiting to be unleashed. Ahead, the SUV blocked the road like a predator, its driver clearly convinced that intimidation alone would force João to back down. But João's instincts were screaming otherwise. He knew that hesitation would mean giving the criminals complete control over the woman's fate. The thought of driving past and pretending he had seen nothing made his stomach twist with shame. The woman's desperate hand pressed again against the window of her sedan. Her movements were frantic now, a silent plea that struck João deeper than any words could. He had no weapon, no backup, nothing but the sheer size of his machine and his determination. And in that instant, he decided, if they wanted a fight, then he would not make it easy. João pushed his foot hard on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, its headlights blazing, directly into the SUV. The sheer force of the engine roared through the night, a sound that shattered the criminal's sense of control. The SUV jolted as its driver slammed the brakes, unwilling to test steel against steel. João swerved slightly, guiding the massive weight of his vehicle to block the sedan completely, creating a barrier of iron between the woman and her attackers. The criminals shouted, their voices muffled but full of anger. One of them stepped out, his silhouette sharp under João's lights. He raised a hand as if to signal, but the deafening blast of João's horn ripped through the night, drowning out everything else. It was a warning, a challenge, a declaration that the woman was no longer alone. The tension escalated to the breaking point. The SUV revved its engine, threatening to lunge forward, but João held his ground. His truck was no ordinary machine tonight. It had become a shield, a weapon of courage. Every second felt like an eternity. His eyes locked on the criminals, refusing to look away, refusing to surrender an inch of the road. For a moment, it seemed like chaos would erupt. One of the men reached toward his belt, a gesture João could not fully see, but one that made his heart pound harder. Still, he did not flinch. Instead, he angled the truck forward, wheels grinding against the wet pavement, pushing closer to the SUV in a slow, unstoppable advance. The criminals stumbled back, realizing that the giant of steel would not be intimidated. The woman inside the sedan covered her face with her hands, trembling but now shielded by the truck's massive frame. João's presence had turned the balance of power. He was one man, but he had tilted the scales against danger with nothing more than determination and his 18 wheels of steel. The SUV hesitated, its driver revving one last time, before swerving violently into reverse. Tires squealed, spraying water across the road. The men inside shouted in frustration, but João did not move. He stayed firm, horn blaring once more, until the SUV peeled off into the darkness, swallowed by the night. Silence followed, heavy and trembling, broken only by the steady hum of the truck engine. João exhaled slowly, his body still tense, his heart hammering inside his chest. He had done it. Against fear, against danger, against every reason to walk away, he had chosen to act. And in that choice, he had given the woman a chance to live. The roar of João's truck still echoed in his ears as silence settled over the stretch of highway. The SUV had disappeared into the shadows, but João kept his position firm, his massive vehicle still blocking the road, shielding the woman's sedan like a fortress of steel. His hands shook slightly as he released the wheel, the adrenaline still burning through his body. He had faced them down, forced them to retreat, but deep inside he knew it might not be over. Men like that rarely gave up easily. The woman inside the sedan sat frozen, her face illuminated by the glow of the hazard lights. She pressed her hands against the window again, but this time it was not desperation. It was gratitude, relief and disbelief all at once. João gave her a reassuring nod, trying to calm the storm that had shaken both of them. Then, faint at first, he caught a sound carried by the wind. A voice on the CB radio crackling with static. "João, what's going on out there? I heard your horn from miles away." Another trucker had been listening. João grabbed the radio, his voice firm though his breath was still unsteady. "Possible assault on the highway. Woman trapped. I need backup." Within minutes, distant headlights appeared on the horizon. Another truck, then another. Word traveled quickly on the road, and soon the once lonely stretch of asphalt was alive with beams of light and the deep rumble of diesel engines. One by one, the trucks lined up behind João, forming an iron wall across the highway. It was an unspoken code among them. When one called, the others came. The woman's tears streamed freely now as she realized she was no longer alone, no longer vulnerable. The predators had fled, but in their place stood guardians of steel, everyday men who refused to let fear rule the night. Moments later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. Red and blue lights danced across the wet pavement, growing brighter as the police arrived. Patrol cars skidded to a stop, officers spilling out with weapons ready, scanning the area for threats. João stepped down from his truck, his boots splashing against the puddles on the road. His legs still trembled, but his voice carried steady as he pointed in the direction the SUV had fled. "They went that way. Dark SUV, 3 men inside." The officers nodded quickly, 2 cars speeding off in pursuit, while the others turned their attention to the woman. They opened her door, helping her out of the sedan. She clung to one of them, her voice shaking as she explained through sobs what had happened. The police listened carefully, casting glances at João, their eyes filled with respect. By now, more locals had gathered too. A farmer who lived near the highway had heard the chaos and came running, flashlight in hand. A small group of people stood at the edge of the scene, whispering in disbelief at the sight. A convoy of trucks guarding a lone woman. A scene of danger turned into one of solidarity. João stood slightly apart, leaning against his truck, the weight of everything finally settling on him. He was exhausted, his body heavy, but his heart lighter knowing he had done the right thing. Around him, the reinforcements had transformed the night from terror into triumph. What had begun as one man's lonely stand had become a collective act of courage. The highway, once drenched in fear, now carried the sound of radios, sirens, and voices speaking with relief. João knew the fight was not his alone anymore. He had answered the call, and others had followed. That was the power of unity on the road. The night that had begun in fear slowly shifted into something else. The highway no longer felt like a trap, no longer echoed with the shadow of predators hiding in the dark. Instead, it was filled with light. Headlights from the trucks that had stopped, red and blue flashes from the patrol cars, and the steady glow of the sedan's hazards that had cried out for help only minutes earlier. The woman stepped out of the car with the support of a police officer, her legs weak from the ordeal. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen with tears, But when she looked up and saw João standing beside his truck, her expression changed. Gratitude flooded her features, the kind that words could never truly capture. She let go of the officer's hand and moved toward him, her steps unsteady but determined. João straightened awkwardly, unsure of how to react. He had not done what he did to be thanked or celebrated. He had done it because there had been no other choice. Still, when the woman reached him and wrapped her arms around him in a trembling embrace, he felt the weight of the moment. Her voice was muffled against his chest, but he could hear the words clearly enough. "You saved my life." The simple sentence struck him harder than the roar of his engine or the blare of his horn had moments before. He patted her shoulder gently, not knowing what else to say, his own voice caught in his throat. He was a truck driver, not a hero. But tonight, she had seen him as something more. Around them, officers continued their work. News came over the radio that the fleeing SUV had been intercepted a few kilometers ahead. The suspects were in custody. Relief spread across the group of truckers who had joined João, their faces breaking into tired but proud smiles. One of them clapped João on the back, a silent acknowledgement that he had been the first to act, the one who had stood in the gap when no one else was there. The woman was taken to a police car to give her statement, but her eyes never left João. She nodded to him again and again, a silent thank you repeated with every glance. For her, this night would be remembered as the night a stranger, a man of the road, became her guardian. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the road washed clean, glistening under the rising sun. João remained at the scene until the police assured him everything was under control. When he finally climbed back into his truck, exhaustion hit him like a wave. Yet beneath the fatigue was a quiet pride, a sense that he had not only kept his promise to deliver supplies, but had also delivered hope in the most unexpected way. In the days that followed, the story spread. Locals called him the Angel of the Highway. Newspapers ran headlines about the truck driver who faced down criminals to save a woman. At the next truck stop, strangers nodded at him with respect, and his fellow drivers recounted the tale over coffee as if it were a legend already etched into the folklore of the road. But for João, it was not about titles or fame. It was about a choice made in a split second, a choice to act when others might have looked away. That was enough. The gratitude of the woman, the relief in her eyes, was more than he had ever asked for. And so, with the memory still vivid, João started his engine once more, ready to face another long stretch of road. He was just a man, just a driver, but on that night he had proven to himself and to others that courage could live in the most ordinary hearts. The highway grew quiet again, the chaos replaced by calm. João guided his truck back onto the open road, the sky beginning to lighten in the distance as dawn broke through the clouds. The world would continue as if nothing had happened. Cars would pass, drivers would honk, and life would move on. But for João and for the woman he had saved, that night would remain carved forever into memory. What happened was more than just a rescue. It was a reminder that true courage often comes from ordinary people. João had not set out to be a hero. He was simply a man doing his job, someone with his own worries, his own family, his own fatigue. Yet when faced with the moment of decision, he chose not to look away. He chose to act. And in that choice, lives were changed. This story is not just about one truck driver and one woman on a dark road. It is about all of us. Life places each of us on highways filled with choices. Sometimes we are the ones in danger, hoping someone will stop. Other times, we are the ones who see the signal, the silent cry for help, and must decide whether we will step in or pass by. Courage is not about strength or training. It is about refusing to ignore what is right in front of us. Think about this. If you were in João's place, alone on a deserted road, would you have stopped? Would you have risked everything for a stranger? That is the question this story leaves behind, and it is a question only you can answer. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Joanne's position? Do you believe courage is something we are born with, or something we find only when life forces us to act? And if this story touched you, if it made you reflect on the meaning of bravery, then support this journey. Like this video so that more people can hear stories of ordinary heroes. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because every week we bring new stories from the road. Stories of danger, survival and courage that prove heroes still walk among us. And prepare yourself, because the next video will take you even deeper into the heart of the highway, where fear meets fate and where one decision can change everything. You will not want to miss what comes next.